Hey everybody, welcome back to Moscow. It's been a while since I've done a sort of an update on the political situation and what's going on here in Russia. And of course there's plenty now to talk about given the events of yesterday, the terrible events in Crimea, the attack in Dagestan on the mosque and on the church and on the police force there, and of course the other attack, which was less reported, which I tweeted about and spoke about, the hostage taking in Rostov, claimed by ISIS, and claim, much like the attack yesterday, very sparsely reported in the Western media. So let's start with Crimea and a bit of background on Crimea, of course. So many people are here. I saw someone on the British media today with the predictably ignorant, Ukrainian territory. The people shouldn't have been on the beach. The people shouldn't have been on the beach because it's Ukrainian territory. Well, the people on the beach then are claimed to be Ukrainian, if that's the case, despite the fact that well over 80% of the Crimean population have consistently voted to remain in Russia, to join Russia when Crimea was an independent republic, basically. At the end of the Soviet Union, it wanted to join Russia. It has voted freely and, decisively to remain part of Russia, as it was prior to 1954. It's a little bit of a history lesson for all the armchair warriors about what Nikita Khrushchev did, who was married to a Ukrainian, who spent a lot of his working life in Ukraine, in the mining industry there, the Soviet leader. He gifted Crimea for some unknown reason from the Russian control during the Soviet times to the Ukrainian SSR. Nobody really knows why he did it. Some people think it was an act of affection because he wanted to demonstrate his commitment to Ukraine, but nobody really knows why. So in 1954, Crimea became nominally Ukrainian territory, but this was all within the USSR, remember. It was one country. These were just different republics that were constituent of it. So when people talk about returning to borders, they have this a la carte attitude. They want to talk about Crimea as Ukrainian territory. Well, it wasn't Ukrainian territory on a Wednesday in 1954, but it was on a Thursday. Is that what you're saying? And the will of the people who live in Crimea has absolutely nothing to do with where Crimea should reside. And if that's the case, the will of the American settlers and who fought the British has nothing to do with it. America is British territory. America should be British. Ireland should be British. India should be British. The will of the people is irrelevant. And this, of course, is true of most a la carte applications of democracy in the West. When the people of Kosovo, who are fighting against the Serbs who are allied with Russia, when they decide that they want to have an independent state, that's no problem. You don't even need to have a vote. Take it away, boys. Put up your statue of Bill Clinton. They just also put one up, I think, of Obama. Just go ahead, no problem. So the West decides when democracy is applicable, as it does when genocide is applicable. If Netanyahu, who's received $250 billion in aid, primarily in the form of American weapons, fighter jets, which are dropping the bombs on the children, the babies, the breastfeeding mothers and the elderly of Gaza and tearing them to pieces, when he does that, democracy doesn't come into it. That's okay, you go ahead, no worries. If anyone else does that, who isn't an American ally and a stationary aircraft carrier in the Middle East, as Israel has been for decades, it's terrorism, it's genocide. So this a la carte morality applies. And that brings us back to the beach yesterday in Crimea, where people were sitting on the beach. It was a holiday, a religious holiday. It's a Sunday afternoon, and next thing, an American missile targeted by an American satellite, operated by American technicians, being guided essentially by an American Global Hawk reconnaissance drone, explodes over the beach, whether it was targeting the beach or flying over the beach to target a Russian airbase we don't know. Nonetheless, 100 people are badly injured. Several are killed, a lot of kids in intensive care. And I've seen this in Belgorod. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've been there while they bomb these places. In Belgorod's case, usually with Czech Vampire MLRS rockets. So this is the equivalent of giving your neighbour a gun, ammunition, a map of the local bank, and giving him all the information he needs to go and execute people there to do his greasy business, and then saying that you've absolutely no culpability in this. And I put up a tweet yesterday, a pretty big tweet, there's over 1 million views on it I think now, where I suggest, what would America do if this happened in Florida or this happened in an American city? What would happen? What would they do? They would knock the shit out of the country who had supplied the weapons. I mean, they've just embarked on another ridiculous load of sanctions against Russia. The 14th sanctions package. It's fucking ridiculous. Sanctioning singers. That's the end of the war, right? Shaman can't play a concert in the EU anymore. Oh, that's the end of the war. It's absolutely ridiculous and desperate. So, the attack on Crimea, again, it undermines and reiterates the inability for the United States, for the US to keep its dog on its lead. And its dog being the dictatorship of Zelensky. And remember, for all the howling and singing and hugging and loving in Switzerland about democracy and freedom, well, the man they say is the prime example of democracy and freedom is unelected. He has no mandate whatsoever to be president of Ukraine. Forget about the fact that he was elected on the basis in 2019 that he would end the war and destroy corruption. Oh, give me a break. End the war? Yeah, say no more, okay? End the war. And tackle corruption. He was elected because of the money, influence and power of a guy called Ihor Koiminski, one of the biggest, most crooked oligarchs in Ukraine. Koiminski, by the way, was the guy who was behind funding the Azov battalion as well. Also wanted by the State Department for embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from the US taxpayer. Nice guys. But again, as we know, just like with ISIS, as Jake Sullivan told us, in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side. We see, the famous email. So that brings us nicely to this very strange and convenient upsurge now in Russia and in the Russian republics of Islamist terrorism. Take Crocus, for example. And we know that there are links now to the West via Ukraine with the people who attacked the Crocus City Hall. I was there in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath. I saw the destruction. I saw what they did to those people, cutting the throats of injured men and women, savages. I saw what they did. And there is an absolute consensus here, political and out on the streets, about who is actually behind this attack in Crocus. How and why? What is the mechanism by which to try and destabilize Russia, cause internal strife between the generally harmonious relations between Russian Christians, Jews and Muslims? It's all part of a plan. A plan, I have to say, increasingly has its finger pointing to the United Kingdom as an engine of this war, as we know, with Boris Johnson literally pulling away Zelensky from the table very soon after the conflict, this phase of the conflict began. So you've got this Islamic resurgence in Islamic terror. In Rostov we had ISIS men who were being detained there. They took hostages. Suddenly they have ISIS flags, ISIS-K taking responsibility for what happened in Crocus. And now in Dagestan, a Russian republic by the way, we have this latest terror attack where we've got at least 15 police officers killed, all the attackers killed we believe. So do you think this is all completely by accident? Russia shrugs off the sanctions. Russia's economy grows in the face of the biggest economic declaration of war from the West, probably in history. The biggest econo-cultural attack on Russia, probably in history. But Russia shrugs it off, dusts itself down, gets up, economy growing, life basically normal in Russia. On a military front, the Russian military growing, learning, innovating, not losing, winning in Ukraine, incrementally, slowly, because they're not doing what Netanyahu is doing with American weapons and completely leveling entire population centers with the people in it. Because they're not doing that. So because of this, where does the West have to go? What's the natural order of progress for these people who've invested so much in this econo-cultural war in Russia? Where do they go? Where do you go if you're Ursula von der Leyen, Guy Verhofstadt, Charles Michel, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, this putrid elite that have guided Europe towards the edge of war? Then there's the idiot elite like Scholz, Baerbock, who have dragged once great Germany to the verge of another European conflict. And in the background, you've got the demented elite, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, all of course being, guided and directed by the US State Department, Anthony Blinken, the likes of Newland and that sort of putrid, faceless elite, who will not die in the war they start, whose kids won't die in the war, but they will then retreat to their beautiful beachfront houses in Florida and eat oysters with Zelensky and his wife. That's how it's going to run. That's how it always runs. And because they cannot beat Russia on the field, they cannot beat them regarding the economic war, Russia's relationship with China gone from strength to strength, Vladimir Putin traveling in the East, doing deals, military alliances with North Korea, another country whose history has been written, remember, by the people who want to destroy it. Much like Russia's history has been written by a bloc and a power base that wants Russia destroyed, crippled, torn to pieces, and the proceeds shared out among the globalist elites. That's what this is all about. And they've admitted that now. They've admitted they want to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. What does that mean? It means tearing it to pieces. But the people here didn't get the memo. The big problem. So where to next? When your wars are failing, your hybrid wars, your propaganda wars, and your proxy wars are exhausted and failing, what do? You start another war. You don't have a moment of self-realization and, move towards consensus and do a deal on the basis of what the actual agreed reality is. Sanctioned Russia. What you do, you start another war of distraction. And remember the likes of Sunak, Johnson, Biden, Kamala Harris, Baerbock, Scholz, Mark Rutte in Holland. You start another war, because war is the ultimate distraction from your chronic political failure. Look at in my own country, in Ireland, the gobshite elite, the uni party elite. You can't buy a home in Ireland, you can't get into a hospital, you can't walk the streets at night. But what you can do is import hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, replace our flag with theirs, not because they're bad people or because you shouldn't help refugees, but because it's a distraction. It's a distraction. Much like poor old Nigel Farage, the man they love to hate, probably because he's got it right so often. He got the EU right, the corruption in the EU, correct. In 2014, he openly spoke in the European Parliament about the fact that there was going to be a war with Russia and it was the EU that was going to cause the war. Oh, shock horror. What is he now? He's a Putin puppet for saying that, for telling the truth. He's guilty of the great crime of self-awareness, truth and factual analysis. which is the most toxic, dangerous thing you could possibly do in the West right now. Actually calling it out for what it is probably more offensive to the Western media and political elite than being a paedophile. Or, certainly more offensive than massacring 15,000 children, tearing them to pieces, and then shouting about how well your weapons industry is doing because of the wars you've started. Think about it. Anyway, back to poor old Nigel. Poor old Nigel, telling the truth. Now he's a Putin puppet. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that his Reform Party, which wants to challenge a lot of the bullshit in British politics, in the Uni Party of the Conservatives and Labour, Keir Starmer, the man who kept Assange in prison, by the way, when he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service, don't forget it. So Assange challenges that. Nobody in the Western media wanted to talk about Assange's view on Russia for 10 years. Nobody wanted to mention it. Don't mention it. Assange's Farage's view on Russia for 10 years. 2014, he's been consistently saying, we started this. We poked the bear. But now, as his party gains traction in the UK, overtakes the Conservatives of Richie Rich Sunak, suddenly everyone wants to talk about Farage's views on Putin and Russia. Suddenly, wonder why. It's really time for people to wake up in the West. As I said, and I say it again and again, you don't have to like Vladimir Putin. You don't have to agree with him, but you have to accept reality. You can't make up your own facts. You can have your opinions and your views, of course. But believe me, there's absolutely nobody in Russia remotely detached from the reality of what's happening in the West and the way things are moving. Look what happened in the EU elections. And even because the EU elections aren't the results they want among the political elites, suddenly the democratic elections, which they're so beholden to in their ethos of we have to spread democracy. But when the democratic result isn't what you like, it was manipulated by Russia. So you can't have an opinion whatsoever which counters the state opinion. You're deemed a dissenter, or even worse, as I've been called in Ireland, at a meeting attended by the American, British and Ukrainian ambassador, a subversive. That's what they call me, a subversive. I'm a subversive because I disagree, and I want to talk about the facts and the reality of this forever war, which I want to see ended. But no money in that. No money in that whatsoever. So stay on your toes, keep thinking, and in the pub, at the kitchen table, in your workplace, everywhere you get a chance to speak out against the war machine. Call it out on the basis of facts and reality. If you're really against war, the way to end it is through discussion. You don't have to like how it ends. If we were to go through every Western-based war, wars of attrition, murder, profit, all based on lies, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, South America, Grenada, we would have to be here all day. It'd be dark by the time we finish talking about their bullshit. So, from Russia, from Moscow, yet again, I just urge you to think for yourselves. Seek out the truth, seek out a balanced, objective view of what's really happening. Because at the end of the day, they want to sleepwalk you, your families, take your taxes, and basically push you over the cliff. And they will stay on the top. They won't be going with you. So never forget that. So from Moscow, for now, be good to each other, be safe, think for yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. God bless.